Imagine a place where the boundaries of our reality don't just bend. They completely break apart. Darkness slowly fades into a sprawling, desolate landscape where the silence feels heavy and unnatural. Deep within northern Utah lies the Uinta Basin, a region defined by its rugged, ancient beauty. But beneath this quiet exterior, the basin hides a reputation for being a global paranormal hotspot. What if one small patch of earth held every single mystery we have ever dared to fear? Why does this specific valley seem to attract the impossible and the unexplained with such intensity? This stretch of land is considered one of the most active supernatural epicenters on the entire planet. Locals often whisper about the strange lights and terrifying figures that haunt the high desert plateaus. Statistically, 3 out of every 4 people in northern Utah have witnessed something truly out of the ordinary. For those living here, the impossible isn't just a story. It is a regular part of their lives. At the very heart of this mystery sits the infamous and chillingly named Skinwalker Ranch. Some have famously described this location as the absolute Disneyland of paranormal and supernatural phenomena. It is a place where every terrifying ride offers a different flavor of fear for those watching. From glowing orbs to massive cryptids, the variety of high strangeness reported here is simply staggering. Long before modern investigators arrived, the land was already steeped in legends of ancient, malevolent spirits. The Uinta Basin acts like a magnet, pulling in every anomaly known to man and many unknown. The history of this basin is filled with reports that defy logic and shatter our scientific understanding. But this isn't just a local legend. It's a living nightmare for those who cross its borders. Every shadow in the basin tells a story that challenges everything we know about our world. Prepare to enter a territory where the impossible is common and the truth remains hidden. This is the story of a land where the paranormal finds its most active home on Earth. The Shermans didn't have weeks to settle into their new ranch. They didn't even have hours. Before the boxes were even unpacked, the mysterious landscape of the Uinta Basin introduced itself. On their very first day moving in, the family encountered a creature that defied all logic. Standing before them was a wolf, at least 3 times the size of any average predator. This massive beast stood like a silent sentinel, watching the newcomers with an eerie, calm intelligence. As it drew closer, the family noticed the creature possessed piercing, intelligent blue eyes that chilled them. Terry Sherman, standing over 6 feet tall, realized the wolf's head reached the very top of his shoulder. Despite its impossible size, the animal appeared strangely docile at first, almost as if it were tame. But the peaceful atmosphere shattered instantly when the predator's true nature suddenly flared into a violent rage. The giant wolf lunged toward the corral, clamping its massive, powerful jaws around a young calf's head. Panicked, Terry Sherman grabbed his .357 Magnum and fired 3 shots into the wolf's thick abdomen. At point-blank range, the high-caliber rounds seemed to do absolutely nothing to the monstrous, gray beast. There was no blood, no yelp of pain, and certainly no sign the creature felt any impact. Stunned by the lack of effect, Terry fired a 4th shot aimed directly at the wolf's heart. Only then did the creature finally release the calf, slowly retreating about 30 feet away from them. The beast stood there unfazed, staring back at the family with those haunting, luminous blue eyes once more. Realizing the handgun was useless, Terry scrambled to retrieve his much more powerful .30-06 hunting rifle. He took careful aim and fired 2 more rounds into the creature from a very short distance. One of the heavy rifle shots finally managed to detach a small, bloody chunk of the wolf's flesh. Even with a piece of its body missing, the wolf simply turned and began to trot away. Terry and his son followed the creature, desperate to understand what kind of monster they were facing. When they reached the spot where the flesh had fallen, a visceral and disturbing reality hit them. The detached chunk of wolf meat smelled incredibly rotten, as if it had been dead for weeks. This wasn't the scent of fresh blood, but of something long dead and left in the scorching sun. They continued tracking the beast across the ranch, following its heavy paw prints through the thick mud. The trail led them toward a mud bank, approximately 40 yards away from the edge of the water. Suddenly, the large tracks simply stopped in the middle of the open ground, without any explanation. How does a creature take point-blank fire to the heart and then simply vanish into thin air? Where did tracks go when they simply end in the mud with nowhere else to lead? The wolf was gone, but the mystery of its impossible survival was only just beginning. The Shermans weren't the first to feel watched on these 480 acres of remote land. To understand the impossible wolf, we must look back centuries at the history of this place. Nestled in northern Utah, this property sits roughly 100 miles east of Salt Lake City. The ranch spans exactly 480 acres, yet its dark reputation stretches much further than its borders. This territory sits within the Uinta Basin, a region long plagued by sightings of unexplained lights. Within the Uinta Basin, reports of humanoid figures have persisted for many decades. Strange stories of Bigfoot wandering the northern Utah wilderness have been shared by locals for years. Accounts of high strangeness in this region date back to the earliest human settlements. For generations, the land has acted as a focal point for events that defy logical explanation. The Ute tribe has lived alongside these mysteries for hundreds of years with growing caution. They believe Skinwalker Ranch is the focal point of a curse placed by the Navajo. This ancient conflict transformed the soil into a repository for dark and vengeful spiritual energy. To this day, members of the Ute tribe are strictly forbidden from setting foot on the land. Legend warns that this specific acreage lies directly in the path of the terrifying A skinwalker is described as a shape-shifting entity that brings misfortune to all who see it. Tribal members will often go miles out of their way to avoid crossing the ranch's boundary. Is it a literal curse? Or is it just the inherent nature of this strange place? Why would an entire tribe forbid their people from ever stepping foot on this soil? The ranch acts like a lightning rod, growing in phenomena that span through many generations. This deep-seated avoidance creates a sense of dread that permeates every inch of the ranch. History suggests that what Terry and Gwen Sherman encountered was part of an ancient pattern. The history of Skinwalker Ranch is a long chronicle of events that baffled the human mind. This stretch remains the epicenter of high strangeness within the legendary and mysterious Uinta Basin. From ancient curses to modern investigations, the land continues to guard its many dark secrets. The land was already claimed by something the locals refused to name or acknowledge. To understand the terror at Skinwalker Ranch, one must look back at a bitter tribal conflict. Long ago, the Navajo tribe supposedly placed a dark and powerful curse upon their Ute rivals. This ancient hex transformed the lush basin into a place of perpetual dread for the Ute people. They believe the ranch sits at the very heart of this devastating and legendary tribal curse. For the Ute, this is not just folklore. It is a terrifying reality that shapes their lives. Elders whisper that the land serves as a focal point for malevolent forces beyond human comprehension. Because of this curse, the Ute people have maintained a strict distance from these haunted acres. No member of the tribe is permitted to set foot upon the cursed soil of the ranch. This is not a mere suggestion, but a heavy religious law strictly enforced by the elders. Crossing the property line is seen as inviting a spiritual contamination that can never be cleansed. To the Ute, the ranch is a forbidden zone where the veil between worlds is dangerously thin. But the reason for this total avoidance goes far deeper than a simple ancient territorial dispute. Local tradition claims the ranch lies directly within the designated path of the dreaded They believe these shape-shifting entities use the property as a highway between our world and theirs. The Skinwalker is a creature of pure malice, capable of assuming the form of any beast. For generations, the tribe has watched the horizon, fearing what might emerge from that haunted path. While the Shermans tried to build a home, the Ute knew the land already had owners. Every strange light and mutilated animal was, to them, predictable evidence of the ancient curse. They watched from the safety of the distance, knowing the ranch belonged to the shadows alone. As Robert Bigelow and Needs later discovered, some warnings are written in the blood of history. The Ute refusal to enter the land remains a chilling testament to the ranch's dark legacy. Deep within the Uinta Basin, the silence of the desert hides secrets that few dare to vocalize. Even as Terry Sherman gripped his .357 Magnum, he could not fight what he did not understand. Long before the term Blue Meanies was coined, the tribe recognized these entities as ancient invaders. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman thought they found a bargain in the remote Uinta Basin. It was supposed to be a fresh-started dream for a professional, high-end cattle breeder. Terry, Gwen, and their 2 children arrived at the ranch with high hopes for their future. For Terry, a professional breeder, the land offered a perfect landscape for his elite cattle business. To the north, a high ridge loomed over the property like a silent, watching sentinel. A gentle, flowing creek carved through the southern edge, providing water for the family's livestock. Yet, this seemingly perfect property had sat completely empty and unattended for 7 long years. An anonymous family had owned the ranch throughout the latter half of the 20th century. Without any public explanation, those previous owners had abruptly vacated the property back in 1987. For nearly a decade, The land remained quiet, waiting for someone new to claim its soil. When the Shermans finally made their move, they purchased the ranch for far less than its value. Why would such a prime piece of acreage be sold at such a significant discount? Buying the ranch was like stepping into a beautiful house that was secretly built over a void. The low price tag came with a dark warning that the Shermans didn't yet understand. While they saw a breeding paradise, the land held secrets that had kept others far away. Shadows from the northern ridge stretched across the fields, hinting at the mystery within Skinwalker Ranch. Even the southern creeks seemed to whisper of the strange events that occurred years before. Remote and isolated, the 480-acre property stood as a lonely island. No one had maintained the fences or walked the trails since the previous family left. To the Shermans, the neglected state of the land was simply an opportunity for hard work. They envisioned a thriving ranch filled with elite cattle grazing under the wide Utah sky. They had no idea why the previous family fled or what awaited them in the shadows. The ancient legacy of the basin was about to collide with their modern-day dreams. But the bargain price was the first sign that something was deeply wrong with their home. Soon, they would realize that some properties stay empty for a very terrifying reason. When they finally got the keys, they realized they hadn't just bought a ranch, they'd bought a fortress. The first red flags for Terry and Gwen Sherman weren't in the fields. They were on the doors. As they stepped inside, the Shermans found the main homestead in a state of unsettling, heavy disrepair. Dust and decay filled the rooms, but it was the modifications that truly chilled the new owners. Massive deadbolts had been installed on the front and back doors, suggesting a desperate need for safety. Why would anyone need such extreme security in the middle of the remote Uinta Basin? The paranoia deepened when they found heavy deadbolts installed on every single interior door as well. This house wasn't designed to be a home. It was a panic room disguised as a homestead. Even the windows were fortified with locks, as if the previous owners feared something climbing inside. Who puts deadbolts on the inside of every window to keep the outside world away? Thick, heavy-duty chains hung from metal rungs embedded deeply into the walls at the main entrances. The sight of those cold, iron chains suggested a level of fear that defied all logic. It seemed the previous family wasn't just locking the doors. They were bracing for an assault, but the strangeness didn't end with the hardware. It was written into their legal agreement, too. A bizarre clause in the real estate contract strictly prohibited the Shermans from digging on the land. Any excavation required express approval from the previous owners, a demand that felt deeply suspicious and controlling. What was hidden beneath the soil of Skinwalker Ranch that necessitated such a restrictive and unusual rule? Were they trying to keep a secret buried, or were they afraid of what might wake up? Every lock and every line of the contract whispered a warning that the Shermans ignored at first. Even the ground itself was off limits, written into the very contract they had just signed. Soon, they would learn that some mysteries are better left undisturbed beneath the desert sun. Beneath the shifting shadows of the Uinta Basin, a deep and unsettling mystery began to take root. Long before the Shermans arrived, an anonymous family held title to the land of Skinwalker Ranch. This family had endured the property for decades, throughout the latter half of the 20th century. They lived amidst the silence of the high desert, but that silence was often interrupted by something. They lived with the knowledge that this specific patch of land held secrets better left alone. Then, in 1987, everything changed for the owners who had called this remote property their home. Without any warning or a buyer waiting in the wings, the family made a sudden, desperate choice. They gathered their essential belongings and simply walked away from the house they had built there. The year 1987 marked the moment they decided the ranch was no longer a place for humans. They didn't care about the profit or finding a successor to take over the vast acreage. Escaping the oppressive atmosphere of the ranch became more important than the property value itself. After their hasty departure, a heavy and unnatural stillness descended upon the entire ranch. The property sat abandoned throughout the changing seasons in the heart of the Uinta Basin. For more than 7 long years, the ranch sat entirely empty and completely unattended by anyone. During this time, the rusted gates remained locked against a world that had forgotten them. The desert winds howled through the structures left behind to rot in the unforgiving sun. No cattle roamed the fields, and no lights flickered in the windows during those long nights. It was as if the land was being reclaimed by the very forces that drove them out. During this vacancy of more than 7 years, the local legends only grew more terrifyingly vivid. Passers-by avoided the property, sensing the lingering dread that the previous anonymous owners had left behind. The mystery of why they stayed so long and why they left so fast remains unanswered. This long period of abandonment only added to the dark reputation surrounding the infamous Skinwalker Ranch. By the time the Shermans arrived, the ranch had been waiting in heavy silence for nearly a decade. Whatever had frightened the previous family away was patiently waiting for someone new to cross the threshold. The activity didn't stay outside. It followed the Shermans through their heavy, deadbolted doors. Imagine coming home with groceries, only to find them back in the bags you just emptied. Gwen Sherman stood in her kitchen, frozen by the sight of items she had already put away. The milk and bread was suddenly back in the paper sacks, as if time had simply reset. Living in the house felt like being a guest where furniture was rearranged by an invisible hand. Soon, the domestic horror intensified as everyday items began to vanish from their proper places. Towels and hairbrushes disappeared from the bathroom, leaving Gwen searching the empty rooms in growing frustration. These personal belongings would later reappear in the most impossible and nonsensical locations around the house. Is this the work of a ghost, or something much more physical and invasive? The sanctuary of their new home was quickly becoming a psychological battlefield for the family. Every room in the house felt heavy with the weight of an unseen, unsettling presence. Terry and Gwen Sherman began to realize that no lock could keep this mystery at bay. Even the sturdy walls of the Uinta Basin ranch couldn't shield them from the high strangeness. While Gwen dealt with the shifting house, Terry Sherman faced his own impossible challenges outdoors. One afternoon, a heavy post digger weighing over 70 pounds vanished while Terry was using it. He had only turned his back for a moment before the massive iron tool simply ceased to exist. How does a 70-pound piece of equipment just vanish into thin air without a single sound? Terry searched the pasture for hours, but the earth offered no clues about where the tool had gone. It took weeks of searching before the missing post digger finally revealed its new, baffling location. On the far side of the ranch, Terry looked up and saw something that defied all logic. There, hanging 70 feet in the air, the heavy tool was wedged high within a tree's branches. No human could have placed it there, yet there it hung as a silent, mocking testament. The violation of their safe space was total, leaving the Shermans feeling watched and deeply vulnerable. Whatever was haunting the ranch was proving it could manipulate reality both inside and outside. But objects moving was just the beginning. The sky above Skinwalker Ranch was about to open up. While the house was shifting, the sky above Skinwalker Ranch was beginning to tear wide open. Terry stepped into the desert night, unaware that the laws of physics were about to vanish. Silent light suddenly began to rise from the desert floor, defying gravity without making a sound. The family watched in stunned silence as these glowing orbs drifted effortlessly over the nearby treetops. These weren't planes or flares. They moved with a haunting, intelligent grace across the dark horizon. Every instinct told Terry that what he was witnessing did not belong to our modern world. Then, a massive black shape appeared, hovering just 20 feet above the dusty, sagebrush-covered ground. It was a silent high-tech mass that bore a striking resemblance to a small F-117 Nighthawk. The craft sat motionless in the air, a shadow darker than the night surrounding the ranch. No engines hummed and no rotors churned, yet the heavy object remained perfectly suspended in space. But even these strange crafts could not prepare Terry for the anomaly appearing high above him. A swirling orange light began to pulse in the atmosphere, growing into a luminous, circular portal. Terry grabbed his high-powered scope, desperate to see what was hidden inside that glowing celestial tier. As he focused the lens, his mind struggled to process the impossible image appearing before him. How could he see a bright, midday blue sky in the middle of a desert night? The portal acted like a television screen, broadcasting a different channel of reality into the darkness. Through the orange ring, the sun seemed to be shining on a world that wasn't ours. The sun had set hours ago, yet this window showed a sky filled with brilliant daylight. It was a sight that defied every logic, a tear in the very fabric of time. Above their heads, a window into another world remained open, watching the terrified family below. Beneath the shimmering sky, Terry and Gwen Sherman watched as impossible objects began to haunt their property. These weren't mere stars or planes, but physical craft that defied every known law of modern physics. Within the quiet Uinta Basin, the atmosphere grew heavy with the weight of an unseen high-tech presence. The family soon realized they were no longer alone on the ranch, but were being actively monitored. Strange, luminous orbs began to manifest frequently, casting an eerie glow across the desolate Utah landscape. Terry watched in silence as glowing lights suddenly lifted off the parched ground with effortless, ghostly grace. These silent lights drifted through the darkness, hovering just above the ancient treetops of the remote ranch. There was no hum of an engine, only an oppressive silence that followed every glowing movement they made. Gwen Sherman watched as these brilliant blue spheres, often called blue meanies, danced across the midnight horizon. The objects moved with a deliberate intelligence, as if scanning the terrain for something hidden below. They weren't just passing through, they were investigating the Shermans' land wheat, cold mechanical precision. Every encounter left the family feeling like specimens under a microscope, trapped within their own home. These lights would vanish in an instant, leaving only the sound of the wind through the basin. But as terrifying as the lights were, something even more substantial was lurking in the low shadows. One evening, Terry encountered a sight that would eventually draw the attention of billionaire Robert Bigelow. Hovering a mere 20 feet off the ground was a massive, silent black shape that defied logic. It loomed large against the stars, a triangular silhouette that resembled a small F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter. This solid mass possessed no visible means of propulsion, yet it stayed perfectly still in the air. Terry felt the hair on his neck stand up as he stared at the matte black surface. The craft was eerily silent, lacking the thunderous roar one would expect from a military jet. He'd sat there suspended in the night air, watching the rancher from just beyond the ranch house. This wasn't a trick of the light. It was a physical, metallic intruder within their private sanctuary. The presence of such advanced technology on Skinwalker Ranch suggested a mystery far deeper than simple ghosts. Terry began to wonder if these visitors were extraterrestrial or perhaps something from a government black project. Even with his .357 Magnum at his side, Terry felt completely powerless against such advanced aerial phenomena. The sheer variety of these crafts suggested the Uinta Basin was a crossroads for something truly bizarre. These sightings would eventually draw the intense focus of Robert Bigelow and his dedicated NID's research team. Before the scientists arrived, the Shermans were left to witness these mechanical terrors without any outside help. Each night brought a new shape, a new light, and a new layer of dread for the family. The ranch was no longer a home, but a staging ground for a high-tech paranormal invasion. This wasn't just a mystery anymore. For the Sherman family, it had become a brutal massacre. For a dedicated cattle breeder like Terry Sherman, the mounting losses meant more than just terror. These strange occurrences were quickly turning his dream of a ranch into a crushing financial ruin. Within the Uinta Basin, Terry Sherman carefully bred his prize Samantha and Angus cattle with pride. But soon, the very livestock that represented his livelihood began to vanish without a single trace. One afternoon, a prize Angus cow went missing for 24 hours, sparking a desperate search. Terry followed the cow's heavy tracks through the dirt until they reached a small, quiet clearing. In the middle of that field, the tracks simply ended abruptly, as if the animal vanished. It appeared as though the massive cow had been plucked straight into the air by something. How does a 1,000-pound animal disappear from a muddy field without leaving any further footprints? As winter settled over Skinwalker Ranch, the predatory forces only grew more bold and aggressive. During one particularly harsh winter, more prized cows and bulls disappeared from the property. The Shermans searched every inch of the snowy landscape, but found no sign of their livestock. When the cattle were eventually found, the sight was far more disturbing than a simple disappearance. These animals were discovered dead, but they hadn't been killed by any natural predator found locally. The bodies bore surgical quality, cuts that were made with a precision no animal could ever achieve. It was as if a master surgeon with a high-tech scalpel had performed a silent procedure. How do you perform these complex, surgical cuts in a dark field without making any sound? Even more chilling was the complete absence of any blood at the scene of the mutilation. Where does the blood go when an entire animal is opened up with such terrifying accuracy? Over their 2 years on the ranch, the family lost a staggering total of 14 cattle. Each loss was a devastating blow to the Shermans, both emotionally and to their bank account. 14 animals gone, and not a single drop of blood was ever left behind. The invisible predators of the basin had moved from haunting the house to harvesting the fields. Terry and Gwen Sherman realized they were no longer just witnesses, but victims of something hungry. The Shermans' cattle were gone, but the ranch's appetite for terror was far from satisfied. The family's loyal protectors were the next target in this unfolding nightmare at Skinwalker Ranch. Before the final tragedy, strange red orbs, the size of tennis balls, zipped through the trees. These glowing spheres darted with impossible speed, watching the family from the dark Uinta Basin woods. But it was the blue orbs, nicknamed Blue Meanies, that brought a truly paralyzing sense of dread. These sapphire lights didn't just move. They radiated an intense, overwhelming wave of fear and anxiety. To those who stood near them, the air felt thick with a malicious, almost intelligent energy. Terry Sherman watched as one of these glowing blue spheres hovered near the edge of a thicket. His 3 bravest hunting dogs, sensing a threat, didn't hesitate to charge toward the mysterious light. With fierce barks, the hounds pursued the shimmering blue orb deep into the tangled, dark brush. Terry followed their voices, but the sound of barking was suddenly replaced by a horrific yelp. A chilling silence fell over the ranch, heavier than any night the Shermans had ever experienced. Terry called out for his loyal companions, but only the cold desert wind answered his desperate cries. The next morning, the sun rose to reveal a scene that would haunt the Shermans forever. In the spot where the dogs vanished, 3 small, smoldering piles lay on the scorched earth. There was no blood, no struggle, and no signs of the powerful animals that once stood there. Only 3 cauterized piles of flesh remained, vaporized by an energy no human could possibly explain. The sheer brutality of the act proved that whatever haunted the ranch was both lethal and heartless. This wasn't just a property anymore. It was a killing field where even their protectors were prey. For Terry and Gwen, the loss of their dogs was the final, agonizing breaking point. Their hope for a peaceful life had been vaporized alongside the animals they loved so dearly. They finally understood that no lock or firearm could protect them from the Blue Meanie's malice. The ranch wasn't just haunted, it was being operated by unseen, rhythmic forces from beyond. It was as if the ranch itself was waking up, pulsing with a cold heartbeat of steel. Near the canal, Terry watched in disbelief as the water displaced under the weight of invisible feet. These heavy ripples moved with eerie purpose, suggesting something massive yet completely transparent walked the banks. Every step taken by the unseen visitor sent shivers through the grass, yet nothing was there. Above the Uinta Basin, disembodied voices began to echo from the sky in languages no human recognized. The guttural sound seemed to originate from nowhere, reverberating through the air like a distorted celestial radio. Terry and Gwen would listen in terror as the sky spoke in tones that felt ancient and alien. Beneath the dusty earth of Skinwalker Ranch, the low, rhythmic churning of heavy machinery began to hum. The vibrations felt like a distant railroad, suggesting a subterranean world operating right under the family's feet. The ground became like the deck of a massive ship, with iron engines churning deep within the rock. Why would there be industrial sounds coming from deep underground in such a remote, desolate location? Strange, perfect cookie-cutter holes appeared overnight, where hundreds of pounds of soil had simply vanished. No piles of dirt remained nearby, as if the earth itself had been surgically extracted by ghosts. These circular voids were clean and precise, defying any natural explanation or known digging equipment. Featureless black entities began to manifest, peering through the homestead windows with a chilling, vacant presence. These tall, dark figures stood silently at the ends of beds, watching the Shermans in the dead night. No locks or deadbolts could keep these shadows out, as they drifted through the house like smoke. Predatory canine hyena hybrids with razor-sharp claws were spotted stalking the livestock across the darkening property. These monstrous creatures attacked with a ferocity that left the Shermans reaching for their .357 Magnum in vain. The ranch was no longer a home, but a laboratory for high strangeness that defied all logic. Every corner of the property now felt occupied by an organized, physical, and increasingly aggressive presence. These escalating events signaled that the Uinta Basin was hiding secrets far beyond mere ghost stories. Word of this industrial-scale haunting would soon attract the attention of billionaire Robert Bigelow and the Nids. Something was moving beneath them, and something even more terrifying was watching from the infinite sky. The Shermans finally understood that they were not the masters of this land, but its terrified subjects. The horrors at Skinwalker Ranch were no longer just shadows dancing at the edge of the Shermans' vision. Something physical was now moving across the Uinta Basin, leaving behind impossible and very tangible scars. One afternoon, Terry Sherman stood by the ranch canal and witnessed a sight that defied every physical law. The water suddenly churned and parted as if heavy, invisible feet were marching straight through the flow. Huge depressions appeared in the liquid surface, yet there was absolutely nothing there to cause the disturbance. Whatever was walking through that canal possessed a massive weight that the natural world could not hide. Terry watched in stunned silence as the invisible entity continued its steady trek across the muddy ranch floor. But the displacement of water was only the beginning of these strange, physical intrusions onto the property. The Shermans soon discovered mysterious, perfectly circular holes carved deep into the dry earth of the basin. These cookie-cutter impressions looked as though they were created by a giant, high-precision industrial tool. Upon closer inspection, Terry realized that hundreds of pounds of dense soil had simply vanished from the site. There were no piles of dirt nearby, suggesting the earth had been extracted by an impossible force. No tracks or heavy machinery were ever found leading to these bizarre and surgical excavations in the ground. The precision of the cuts indicated a level of technology that far surpassed anything the Shermans understood. It felt as though something was sampling the ranch, taking pieces of our world back into theirs. These events proved to the family that the phenomena weren't just hallucinations or tricks of the light. Something invisible yet incredibly heavy was claiming the land and literal chunks of the earth beneath them. The feeling of being watched intensified as the physical evidence of these unseen intruders began to pile up. Terry clutched his .357 Magnum, knowing even its power meant nothing against an invisible, heavy intruder. Word soon spread about these physical anomalies, eventually reaching the ears of billionaire researcher Robert Bigelow. Before needs arrived to investigate, the Shermans faced these terrifying and invisible manifestations entirely on their own, while the blue meanies haunted the air. These invisible walkers were claiming the very ground they occupied. Every step they took on the ranch felt like an intrusion into a domain controlled by others. The invisible forces were no longer just watching. They were actively reshaping the terrain of Skinwalker Ranch. Terry and Gwen Sherman watched the sunset, wondering what else the unseen entities would eventually take. Terry and Gwen had reached their limit as the unrelenting terror of the ranch became unbearable. The mysterious activity wasn't just a mental burden. It started to devastate the family's financial stability. During their time on the ranch, Gwen Sherman even lost her job at a bank in town. With their cattle dying and income vanishing, the Shermans were staring down the barrel of total bankruptcy. By 1996, they were utterly defeated. But the mystery of the ranch was just going corporate. Can science solve what a family couldn't survive? Or would the entities simply hide from the light? Word of the strange occurrences reached Robert Bigelow, a billionaire businessman with a passion for the unknown. Bigelow saw the property not as a home, but as a living laboratory for investigating high strangeness. He founded a professional scientific team dedicated to peeling back the layers of the ranch's dark history. In July 1996, the Shermans sold the property to Bigelow and prepared to leave their nightmare behind. The family finally vacated the ranch, hoping to find peace away from the shadows of the basin. Why would a billionaire spend a decade studying a patch of desert that had broken a family? The ranch passed from the hands of a desperate family into the hands of a high-tech laboratory. In September 1996, the National Institute for Discovery Science officially moved on to the haunted property. This organization, known as NA-EDASA, brought a level of scrutiny the Uinta Basin had never seen before. A professional team of researchers arrived to replace the Shermans' .357 Magnum with advanced monitoring equipment. They were determined to capture proof of the blue meanies and the other entities haunting the land. Scientists walked the same trails where the cattle had been mutilated, searching for any physical evidence. They were not just looking for ghosts, but for a reality-bending force that defied modern physics. The NIDS team remained at the ranch for nearly a decade, documenting every instance of bizarre phenomena. They recorded everything from inexplicable lights to the same invisible presence that had terrified the previous owners. The Shermans left for good, but the most intensive scientific investigation in history was just getting started. The heavy gates of Skinwalker Ranch remain closed to most who seek the truth today. If you were Terry Sherman, how long would you have lasted against such relentless, unseen terror? What would you do if the very objects in your home started to move on their own? The deep mystery of this ranch is a door that once opened can never be fully closed. The Uinta Basin still guards its secrets behind shadows that seem to breathe and watch in silence. For Terry and Gwen Sherman, the nightmare ended only when they walked away from their own land. Robert Bigelow and the NIDS team tried to quantify the impossible using the most advanced scientific tools. Even a .357 Magnum proved useless against the blue meanies and the entities haunting the dark. Is the curse still active, waiting for the next curious soul to step onto those 480 acres? We are only beginning to scratch the surface of the high strangeness hidden within our world. Join us as we dive deeper into the unexplained historical accounts that defy every law of physics. Subscribe now to ensure you never miss a journey into the darkest corners of the paranormal unknown. Tap the bell icon to stay alerted whenever we uncover another layer of the world's greatest mysteries. What do you believe is truly happening beneath the blood-red mesas of the Uinta Basin? Leave a comment below with your wildest theories about what drove the Shermans from their home. History is filled with accounts of high strangeness that demand our attention and our questioning minds. Together, we will continue to explore the enigmas that lie just beyond the reach of modern science. The truth is often stranger than fiction, and far more terrifying than we dare to imagine. Some secrets are meant to be found, while others should perhaps stay buried in the desert. Until next time, keep watching the skies and the ground beneath your feet.